Okay, so the whole world is watching right now as things escalate between Iran and Israel. It's tense, and everyone's asking the same things. How did we even get here? And, where is this all going? To get some answers, we really need to look at this from a few different angles.
Look, this situation it's a tangled web, for sure. But there's a way to start untangling it. We're going to look at this through three totally different lenses. Think of it like this. We've got two opposing game plans from major world leaders, and then a third, much bigger idea that kind of makes you question the entire game itself. Let's dive in. So, here's our game plan. We'll start with what's happening right now, this world on edge. Then we'll look at the first big idea, the decisive strike. After that, we'll flip the coin and check out the defensive shield. Then we're going to pull back, take a much deeper look at something called the MIC, and finally, we'll ask the big question. Are we all just stuck in some kind of unending cycle?
So, what's got everyone so spooked? Well, these recent attacks between Iran and Israel, this is a huge deal. This isn't just some proxy war anymore, with other groups fighting on their behalf. Nope, this is them, face to face. And you can bet leaders around the globe are on high alert, trying to figure out their next move. All right, let's get into our first perspective. Let's call it the decisive strike. Now, this is all about hitting first and hitting hard. The most prominent voice for this strategy, former US President Donald Trump. His whole philosophy is about using military might to shut down a threat before it can even get off the ground. And this quote really says it all, doesn't it? The whole idea here is built on absolute faith in American military power. It's about projecting so much strength that nobody dares to mess with you. And if they do, well, you don't just win, you eliminate the threat, period. So what's the thinking behind this? How do you justify that kind of action? Well, if you subscribe to this view, you see Iran as a threat that's been bubbling for almost half a century. So things like tearing up the nuclear deal, what he called the worst deal ever, or the strike that killed General Soleimani, they aren't seen as starting a fight. Instead, they're framed as absolutely necessary steps to stop a nuclear-armed Iran and head off a much, much bigger disaster. When you boil it all down, the goal is pretty straightforward, but it's got two parts. First, and most importantly, do whatever it takes to make sure Iran never gets a nuke. And second, it's about hitting the reset button on global power. It's about reestablishing American strength after what supporters of this view would say were years of being pushed around. Okay, so that's one playbook. Now let's look at a completely different one. We're calling this the defensive shield. This approach, which we're seeing from folks like UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, basically flips the whole script. The focus here is all on de-escalation, working together with allies, and using your military to protect, not to preemptively attack. And when you put them side by side, man, the difference is just night and day. On one hand, you have decisive strike, which is all about offensive power, going it alone if you have to, with the goal of totally obliterating threats. On the other hand, defensive shield is about defensive moves, coordinating with your allies, and the main goal is just to protect your people and calm things down. It's a fundamental clash of how you see the world. And you can see this defensive thinking in the UK's actions. At first, the decision was pretty clear. We're not joining in on any offensive strikes. But then, things changed when Iran's attacks spread across the region. At that point, the mission shifted, but it was still purely protective. They sent out Typhoon jets and ships, not to attack, but to act as a shield for British personnel and allies. It's all guided by what Starmer describes as calm, level-headed leadership. Okay, so we've got two very different ways of handling a crisis, strike or shield. But now, let's introduce a third, much deeper perspective. This one asks a really interesting question. What if both of these approaches are just different symptoms of the same disease? What if they're just moves in a bigger game, run by a system that actually wants conflict? I mean, just think about it for a second. Whether you're launching an attack or setting up a defense, what's the common denominator? Both cost a ton of money and involve massive military deployments. And that leads us to this third idea, that maybe we're not just watching leaders make choices. Maybe we're watching a predictable cycle play out, a cycle powered by a machine that just keeps on running. And that machine actually has a name. It's called the Military-Industrial Complex, or the MIC for short. The term actually came from a U.S. President, Dwight D. Eisenhower, in his farewell speech of all places. He gave this incredible warning that the super tight relationship between a country's military and its defense industry could create a really dangerous loop, a need for constant conflict just to keep the whole thing going. Now, People who subscribe to this theory say we are literally watching this cycle happen right now. Here's how they see it. Step 1. The conflict in Russia and Ukraine starts to wind down. Step 2. The MIC needs a new place to focus its energy and resources. Step 3. Boom. The Iran-Israel conflict becomes the new center of attention. Step 4. This new long-term conflict funnels huge amounts of money right back into the system. And step 5. The pattern just repeats, with maybe China being the next focal point on the horizon.
And this theory goes even further. It predicts how the geopolitical chess pieces will move. The thinking is, just like the West poured money and weapons into supporting Ukraine, you're going to see the BRICS nations, think Russia, China, and others, do the same for Iran. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean we're heading for World War III tomorrow, but it does create this long, drawn-out, high-stakes standoff, which, if you're the military-industrial complex, is pretty much the perfect business environment.
And that brings us right back to where we started, to Eisenhower's warning from all those decades ago. So, if this theory holds any water, it begs a pretty scary question. Are we trapped? Is this just the future of global conflict?
You know, that phrase, a death spiral, it's heavy. It paints a picture of a system that's so big and so powerful that it's not really under anyone's control anymore. A system that feeds on crisis and becomes almost impossible to break free from once you're caught in it. Now, let's be really clear here. This third perspective isn't screaming that a nuclear World War III is about to break out next week. The more likely outcome it suggests is another long, grinding regional war. But, and this is a big but, the danger is always there. The idea is that with every turn of this cycle, the stakes get higher and the risk of some future catastrophic escalation just keeps growing.
So, there you have it. 3 different ways to look at this crisis. You've got the decisive strike, which is all about neutralizing threats with force. You've got the defensive shield, which is about protection and de-escalation. And then you have this idea of the military-industrial complex, which suggests that maybe there's a much bigger system pulling the strings behind both of them. Each one gives you a different lens to understand what's happening. So the final question is really for you. After hearing all this, how do you see it?